Hi, I'm Chris from airwindows, and I'm bringing you a somewhat anticipated plugin today. It's called Aura, and this is not the same thing as Aura in hard vacuum. This one, as you may know because I've been talking about it for a while, is what you get when you average the rate of change of the rate of change of the waveform. So as you might imagine, that's not you don't get this standard in your DAW. Nobody really thinks to do a thing like this. It's a fairly simple algorithm, but nobody's doing it. Why would you want to do it? Because it sounds like this. Basically, what we've got here is a thing that behaves like a very steep low pass that's capable of rolling off, but it's not implemented in anywhere near the same way that extremely steep low passes are usually done. And it has this tendency of sort of livening up the area around its cutoff point. I'll show you that again. Because it is an average style thing, it's got some funny shapes going on here, but these are not being applied on the raw samples. They're being applied on the rate of change of the rate of change, so it gets a little more complicated. You can see these little nodes kind of sneaking away as I increase it. There's a quality where it enhances the area that it's going over its threshold, and you can see it a little bit on the graph, where say we've got our hi-hat here, and we're bringing a little of it in. And we can see where it's starting to lose the extreme highs. It's got an ability to provide a certain amount of distance and acoustic space in there because of the way it's smoothing. Like if you had a very steep low pass, the way that algorithms work in the digital domain is generally if you want it a lot steeper, you have to run multiple stages or do a linear phase filter. And it's kind of the same as if you were doing a brick wall filter for just sample rate reconstruction. What happens is this. You've got your filter and it's doing a waveform and it's sort of convolving itself with the audio. And because it's linear phase, it extends in two directions. Now, the steeper you get, the more that your funny waveform, which will be making a sort of wavelet, a little squiggle kind of thing, go through that and you wind up wiping out all the highs. The steeper you try to make it, the more that will go in either direction and more obviously. And the trouble with that, if you're trying to do a very steep filter with just linear phase normal EQ techniques, the amount of it that's extending in front of the audio is a pre-echo. It does not sound good. Sort of gets in the way. Whereas Aura, because it's averaging rates of change, there's no pre-echo, there's no latency. It's doing this pretty much just live. So we start out here. And you can hear how it's chopping away at the extreme highs. And I can document that, like these highs are living at around 96, minus 96 dB, but if I throw this in aggressively, we've got some nodes, and we've got a pretty big amount of attenuation going on there. There's this interesting resonant quality that you get out of it. You can hear through it fairly easily. It's giving a tone, but there's a transparency as well. It's not forming a blur. Instead, you're just able to extend it dial in things like bits of these cymbals. This might be useful for things like distorted lead guitars, for instance, or distorted any guitars. If you're trying to trap away the super high frequency stuff. You get a sort of funny spatial edge at the frequency that you're trying to whack. I can throw some other audio into there just to further illustrate this principle. Here is Stealth Kit Jam. As you can hear, that's very bright, very bright. You can kind of hype it out as you wish. You can find funny little zones in here where different kinds of audio are more or less highlighted. And in so doing, we can explore a kind of sort of highs processing, a kind of treble processing that's not functioning on the principle of any previous EQ. Unless somebody has surprised me by doing a EQ where it's actually done through averaging the rate of change of the rate of change. I don't think anybody's done this. There are some reasons why. For instance, the way that I'm averaging it causes those funny nodes. My opinion, and having to do with averaging in general, and this in particular, is that those sounds aren't as offensive to the ear as, say, pre-echo and stuff. There's a naturalness to it. And then we can turn it off and turn it back on. That's the idea. The idea is that we have a kind of treble roll-off that has not been available before. And this is not available in analog either because the type of processing that we're doing. I don't think there is a analog of it, as you might say. Well, I might say that, but then I'm annoying that way. The whole idea of aura, the reason it's called aura, is that you should be able to dial it in on something that's supposed to have high frequencies. I wish I had a nice strings sample kicking around. I don't, because I don't have an orchestra. But the idea is you can dial stuff in using this where you'd like a particular kind of sheen or sonority on the top of the sound. And I can show that to some extent with this nice bright drum recording. Say, just wankery in the drums, but I was inventing a kind of drum miking. And the amount of highs on it means I can find where the highs live and accentuate them a lot. Like here is, and I'm going to point out that doing this kind of steep, peaky sounding thing is very likely to make a lot of drum sounds, and cymbal sounds in particular, sound like absolute garbage. The easiest way to get a really grungy bunch of hash is to do weird treble boosts on cymbals in the wrong ways. But as I show you this, that's very dark. It sounds pretty ungrungy as I do it. Like you can make it very obviously distorted and messed up. Or very bright and shiny. Take it down a little bit. And you'll also notice it's keeping it out of the way of the extreme super highs. You'll have some difficulty getting a roll off this steep and have it sound natural in normal equalization. Again, aura is something kind of special in the way that it puts a cap on the highs while allowing the area around the cap to sort of sparkle and glisten. You'd think that that was a normal recording, right? You'd think that it was just what those cymbals sounded like on the microphone. But what the cymbals really sounded like is this. And I can roll it off a little more. It's a little cooler, a little darker. Oh, what the heck. Way darker. And now we've found one of the funny little resonances there, so it sounds a bit tin canny. Very mid-rangey here. And yet, there's a difference between what you'd get if you had the same type of really aggressively low-passed, edgy, resonant high thing going on versus when you have the pre-echo, the resonance going on from steep, normal, traditional EQs. This has more of a, the front edge of it is clearer, and in general it's just clearer. Like if you were looking for this kind of brightly resonant thing going on. And of course it works on strings, it works on horns, it works on anything that you would like to sort of put a top on and say, this is normal brightness, and we're going to make this sound as if it's farther away. We're going to trap out the highs of it so you can't hear them any longer. Or indeed, if you stay under about 5 or so, you don't even get the funny resonant thing going on. This area is where you get the funny sounds, and then below about 0.5, we've got something that does a pretty darn good job of behaving as if it's the raw microphone. but of course it isn't because the raw microphone, all of the sparkly highs, and then invisibly attenuated. That's Aura. Now, it's not the most common thing to come up with an entirely different way to low pass, and I probably can't do this literally every week. I'll do my best. I try to keep nice and busy. I have not missed a week for some time now. And other vendors and plugin manufacturers don't always come out with a new product literally every week for Mac, Windows, Linux, in audio unit and VST. But I like to. And it's one of the reasons that I give back from the support I get from my Patreon. The Patreon is the only way I'm compensated unless people try to buy the old audio units, and I don't advertise those very much. I'm going to work my way through all of that, so everything will end up free in the long run. And as I progress, I'm also open sourcing everything as well as making it Linux. And that has some wonderful advantages because when I was trying to get into the Linux thing, I went open source first before I actually had it solved. And when I did that, a nice fellow in another country worked out how to do a little script that just took in my VST code and spit out a bunch of correctly made Linux plugins, Linux VST plugins. That's the kind of thing that can happen when people cooperate with each other. That's the kind of thing that can happen when we give up this sort of everybody fighting each other for business and start just putting stuff out there and going, here, have this. And that's very much the kind of thing that I wanted to see happening. So I'm delighted that it was able to become possible with that same technology, which I didn't do, somebody else did, one of my users did. Anybody who is making Windows VSTs, probably just the generic ones, but maybe you could also do GUI VSTs as well, can also port them to Linux using the same stuff. And neither of us are charging anything for it because it's open source under the MIT license, which is very permissive. And you're welcome to it because that's just how we roll. I'm obviously not the only person doing this, otherwise you wouldn't have the Linux VST. That also means that if people really wanted to include a high pass, or a low pass rather, with this kind of tonality to it, in their open source DAW or open source DJ mixer or something like that, well, this is not only free, but it's also open source. So as long as you're also using the MIT license or something like it, help yourself. That's Aura. I hope you like it, and I'll talk to you later.